Alright, ladies and gents, today we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve at work. We're going to be taking a look at some of the things that the Federal Reserve does on a regular basis. We're going to read pages 332 all the way to page 336, and we're going to go ahead and answer these 6 questions. Alright, so one of the first things we need to understand about the Federal Reserve is that it is a banker's bank. Okay, we as individuals do not bank at a Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, it is the bankers that go to the Federal Reserve Bank to do their banking. So that's very, very important to understand, is that the Fed is a banker's bank. All right, and the Fed does a variety of things. One of the things that it does is check clearing. So if you look on figure 14.3, you can see on page 333, you can see that process of check clearing. And I'm sure many of you have paid by check before, and with check clearing, basically all that's happening is checks are going to be processed by the Federal Reserve Banks. Okay, they're going to be processed by the Federal Reserve Banks on both the buyer side as well as the seller side. Okay, so that is check clearing. All right, now, if we go back to page 332, looking at number 2 here, it says, describe how the Fed serves as a lender of last resort. And this really comes down to where it says in blue, loans to banks on page 332. If private member banks, such as Bank of America, Chase, so forth, if they need emergency loans, because they need emergency money, they can go to the Federal Reserve to get that money. So that is how the Federal Reserve is acting as a lender of last resort. All right, now we're going to go ahead and move on to 3, the role of the Treasury Department. So if we turn to page 334, and we look in red, it says services to the government. It talks about the things that the Treasury does. Okay, so the Treasury Department does several things. Number 1, it serves as the U.S. government's banker. Okay, and make sure that the U.S. government pays the bills. It collects taxes to the IRS, through the Customs Service. It will also produce coins to the U.S. Mint and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. So those are the 3 roles of the Treasury Department. So moving on to 4 here, it says describe the 3 ways the Fed works with the Treasury. You can see those as the 3 bullet points on page 334. First of all, the Federal Reserve will serve as the government's bank. So basically the Fed is the depository institution for federal revenues. So you can take that down for number 4. It will also supervise member banks. Okay, the Fed is going to supervise member banks. It's going to be the watchdog. It's going to make sure that banks hold enough reserves in case people want their money back. And then finally, the Fed is going to regulate the money supply. Okay, the amount of money in circulation. So that would be your last thing you want to put there for number 4. Okay, they regulate the money supply. Now going on to number 5, how does the Fed increase or decrease the money supply? What it will do is it will buy and sell Treasury bonds. So when the federal government runs a deficit, what ends up happening, and they've run a deficit because they've spent more than they've actually collected. In order to pay the bills, they'll need to get people to buy their debt. Okay, and to do this, they go ahead and issue a Treasury bond. So when people buy bonds, they're basically buying the debt of the U.S. government if it is a U.S. Treasury bond. Okay, so the Federal Reserve will buy and sell these bonds. If they want a bigger money supply, they buy bonds. Okay, just remember that they both start with B there. Buy bonds, bigger money supply. Okay, if you sell bonds, you have a smaller money supply. They both start with S. Okay, but the overall most important thing to remember is that the Fed increases or decreases the money supply by buying and selling U.S. Treasury bonds. All right, so moving on here to 336. If you turn to page 336 for me, and we're looking at number 6, the measures of the money supply. And let's talk about them. You can see on page 336. M1, actually before we get to that, when we're talking about the money supply, there's different classifications of the money supply. There are actually 4 different classifications of what's included in these various money supplies. So we're going to go ahead and talk about those 4 measurements. So the first one is M1. Okay, M1 is the simplest measure of the money supply. It is also the most liquid, meaning that it is most easily convertible to cash. So if you take all the currency out in the U.S. economy and then plus the amount that is in checking accounts and add those together, you will get M1. You also have M2. So M2 includes everything in M1 plus money that's in money market and savings accounts. Then you also have M3, which is everything in M2, plus large time deposits, like, for example, large certificates of deposit, or CDs, which is an investment that people can invest in there. And then finally you have L, and L includes everything in M3 plus bonds. Savings bonds, short-term treasury bonds, that kind of thing would be included in L. All right, so those are your 4 measures there, and we will go ahead and take a look at these tomorrow. You have a great day. Bye-bye.